With October 20th only a few days away, the race for municipal office across Alberta is hitting its final stretch. And that means in every municipality across this great province, candidates for mayor, reeve, and yes, even councillor are stepping forward with ideas for stronger communities, smarter growth, and brighter futures. Now, today's edition of Alberta Municipal Votes 2025, we are turning our attention to Mackenzie County, Alberta, where we are honored to be sitting down and chatting with Mackenzie County Council candidate Lisa Wardley. Lisa, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about yourself and talking about your bid to continue on as a Mackenzie County councillor in the great county of Mackenzie County. But I got to start before we talk about the issues and talk about your reelection bid to ask a
Yep.
simple question as you were the first time attendee of this show is where does your sense of duty to serve your community come from, Lisa?
Growing up, I think. I grew up in southern Saskatchewan, and so my family was very involved in community. My mom was a community builder. We were voluntold at a very young age. And when I moved to northern Alberta in 1992, well, I moved to Alberta right after graduation, but I moved to northern Alberta in 1992 and became a northerner, which I realized that it takes longer than just moving there to become a northerner, but that's a whole nother story. But again, I live in a small community. So community, if you want your community to thrive, you need to be involved. And so I raised three kids in the little tiny community of Zama City. And I, again, was involved from the moment I landed to, again, passing that tradition of volunteering my kids as they grew up. And now they're community builders too. So I guess I would say it's in the genes.
Being a community builder can come in many different forms through
Mhm.
nonprofits, through just volunteerism, but you decided politics was how you were going to build your community. What was that decision based on? And to follow up with that, was it always municipal that you wanted to get involved at?
So I started with nonprofit because when my kids were little, and of course, I think it's natural that when you have kids, you're involved in some of the things that they're involved in. So if they play t-ball, you help out with t-ball. If they're in brownies, you help out with brownies. So it started with nonprofit. And then I really started looking into where the nonprofits get their funding from, how they can be more successful, what their barriers are, paying attention to what our community is and what their barriers were. And then I realized that, hey, if I want to actually make a difference, I need to kind of step up my game slightly. So I actually ran for municipal politics in 2004 and was first elected. So I've been a municipal councilor for 20 years. So since then, there was a slight, I don't know if it was a moment of insanity or a moment of clarity. I'm not sure. Some of my friends say one way and some of the say the other way. Is we started pushing back in 2016. A group of municipalities got together and created this Northwest Species at Risk. And so what that was to push back against disastrous land planning legislation that was coming down the pike from our provincial government, but then pushed by our federal government. And I, again, had that moment of clarity where it's like, hold on, we can fight all we want and we can lobby all we want. We can be as great as we want at a municipal, local level. But outside forces like provincial legislation or even federal legislation kind of mold what we can and cannot do. So I decided, kind of a couple of years into that, when the opening was there, to put my name in for provincial MLA nomination. I was not successful, and but it was a very interesting time in my life. I learned a lot, and I learned though at that one where that honestly, municipal politics is where it's at. It's the closest level of government to the people. You have a direct correlation with the people that, your neighbors and your friends and the businesses that call your area home. And in sometimes municipalities are also the gatekeepers when it comes to, again, protecting their residents from disastrous, provincial and federal legislations as well as, or especially in the north, I think some of the legislations and the rules that come out, they're made for more urban areas, more southern areas, and they don't really take into account what this actually means at a practicality level, when it's rolled out in maybe areas of the north or more rural. So I
Is
think
that
it's more of a,
hard? Can I interject there for a second? Is
yep.
that hard to do? Because I will put dollar to dime that you've heard the saying, municipalities are the children of the province, and therefore the municipalities must adhere to what the province does, even if it is something that is for an urban municipality. The rurals have to follow suit because that is the rules of the law, and that's the way that the province has set it up. Is it hard to sort of fight back when you're treated as children?
Yeah, I've heard the children part. I've heard also the creatures of the province, right?
Yeah.
But and I don't know how do I say this with, I think it is hard sometimes, but I don't think that especially the rural municipalities have a real big problem bringing it to the attention of the decision makers that that legislation or that rule or that implementation is not good for rural Alberta. And, so yes, we might be creatures of the province or children to the province, but sometimes we're like insolent teenagers and need to, have to kind of educate a little bit. So, and it's taken with a grain of salt too. We have a very strong relationship with our provincial governments. A lot of the municipalities do, and it takes work, but it also takes respect. You can't, yes, I've been on the steps of the ledge, but, I've also been in meeting rooms where it's, you try and explain. And I think a lot of our MLAs as well, and even our federal MPs, they were just people too. They're neighbors. And sometimes, though, when you're removed from your neighborhood, you kind of forget what your neighborhood's like. So you need to have those people around you that remind you that, hey, you don't live in downtown Edmonton. Although you work there when you're, in session, you live in a northern rural area or a southern rural area or wherever it is. But you just kind of got to remind them and, be respectful, but still hold your ground. I guess if that makes sense.
It does, and it goes back to it doesn't go back to the question, but it goes back to the sort of municipal politicians are the closest level. They're the ones who deal with the issues because you don't go to Edmonton to do your job. You don't go to Ottawa to do your job. You're in your community. You make a decision, you hear about it that night. The federal or provincial government makes a decision. I'm assuming you're also hearing those issues as
That
well.
night. Yeah.
So in the last 20 years since you've been on council since 2004, has the issues that you've been hearing changed that much? Because when I started covering municipal politics back in 2000, I only hear about the municipal issues from municipal politicians. Flash forward to 2025, I'm hearing about healthcare, I'm hearing about education, I'm hearing about a range of issues from municipal politicians.
Mhm.
For yourself, 20 years later, are you talking about jurisdictional issues that aren't traditionally in the municipal purview?
Definitely. Short answer. And I don't normally have a short answer, but definitely. And I think that's because there seems to be, I don't know if it's more of a blur. The municipalities have had to deal with a lot of downloading from the provincial government as well as the federal, and matched with that a lot of expectation changes from our residents. So again, it's not just, roads, water, sewer, streetlights, like kind of the basics that kind of it once was. It's everything. It's social aspects, it's quality of life, it's inflationary, and again, being that closest level of to the people, if they're upset or if they're challenged, you hear about it first. And you can say all you want, well, that's not our jurisdiction. Well, I don't care. I elected you. You're my counselor. So it's again, so you take that forward and again, you bring those issues as kind of a well-rounded conversation to your provincial or your federal counterparts or your school board or your health authority or, whatever it happens to be. Policing, so we're kind of in the middle of everything. And so, yes, we try to be very clear that that's not our jurisdictional issue to deal with, but it is our issue to deal with if it negatively affects our residents. Same thing. If it's positively affecting our residents, a lot of us, we'll give credit where credit is due and we'll celebrate along with the rest of them. So it's not all bad, right?
So you have decided that you're putting your name up for reoffer for the 2025 election. Now, this is a unique election in Mackenzie County. For those who
Yes.
don't know, we're going to get into it here. But the Coles Note version is they were at 10 council member size, and now they have reduced that to 9. And one of the wards that was affected was yours, and now you were representing Ward 10. Now you're running to be Ward 9 councilor. So
Yeah.
take me through the process of why that was important for Mackenzie County to reduce the size of council, or if it was, and why you decided to put your name up for another term in office.
Okay. So I won't ask you to cut this afterwards because I've been very clear. I've been involved with Mackenzie County politics for 20 years, and I've always called it we're dysfunctionally functional. And we are the largest rural municipality in the country. So our landmass is the size of New Brunswick. So if you can imagine, the demographics, geography, culture, community diversity, like we have it in spades. And, my commute to a council meeting is 250 kilometers one way. So if you can imagine, people in Red Deer governing or making decisions for the people in Calgary, right? And that's kind of how we always done that. So me round trip into a council meeting is 500 kilometers. And, the very southern ward in our district, it's about that too. Like the land mass, you truly don't understand how
Okay,
massive our land
so
mass
so
is.
so I need to interject here for a second. So where's the Mackenzie County Council office to begin with?
In Fort Vermilion, which is kind of central.
Okay, and
So
where do
we
you,
do have
where's Ward 9/10 right now?
So the county office, we do have a couple. So we have our main corporate county office is in Fort Vermilion, which is one of the oldest communities. Well, it
Yeah.
depends. It's the oldest community in Alberta if you're on the east or on the west side of the province. But there's also, one on the east side of the province that also Fort Chip. So they argue because it's all 1788 and no one wrote down the month. So in one of the oldest communities of the province is our corporate office, but then we also have a sub office in Lacrete, which is another hamlet within our municipality, a sub office in Zama City, which is a hamlet in the municipality, and a little one just outside in high level for our rural high level residents. And so you do have to, modify things a little bit. Some people look at that as duplication, but I look at that as service level, considering that we're the size of an Atlantic province or a European country. And so, um, so the ward, so Ward 10 was always, and of course we border just for viewers, or I guess whatever. So Mackenzie County is the most northern municipality in the province as well. We border the territories border,
Yeah.
the BC border, Paddle Prairie Métis settlement to the south, and Wood Buffalo National Park to the east. So we're kind of that. We're not Fort McMurray. We're the whole other side of the province. And so Ward 9, 10. Ward 10 was always kind of that Zama City, rural area, the BC territories border. It was about 8,000 square kilometers, the ward. So not a lot of people, a lot of trees, a lot of resources, a lot of revenue for the municipality comes out of Ward 10. Ward 9, same kind of thing, not a lot of people, but a lot of resource, a lot of revenue. We have one of the biggest mills, OSB mills in Canada are that ward, as well as Cenovus. So very high in oil and gas development as well. We also have in Ward 9, kind of that west side of the county, is our two incorporated towns. So the town of High Level and the town of Rainbow Lake, which are service centers for our municipality. And so again, that urban rural relationship needs to be pretty strong in order to supply those services. So I've never been in
Can I
agreement.
interject? Can
Yep.
I interject there just on that
Sure.
statement? I know you're about to say
Yeah.
something that's important as well, but how have you fostered that urban rural relationship during your time in office? Because that's going to be one of the key priorities in
Yeah.
this next term in office is fostering those unique relationships. Because we see the mandate letter that Minister Williams, which happens to be your local MLA,
MLA.
about working together both urban and rural municipalities collaboratively. How have you worked collaboratively with your urban counterparts in Ward 9 and 10?
I think the big thing is again, you try and start with respect and friendship. Start with acknowledging that, the urban areas are our service center, but the rural areas help feed the urban. It needs to be that mutually beneficial, kind of what's good for both areas. But there also needs to be an acknowledgement that we are different, that rural and urban are different. The expectations are different. The service levels are different. And, so part of it has been approaching it with an education in mind. And I remember going into an urban rural meeting, and one of the individuals brought up that they couldn't understand why we had so many graders. Why do we need so many graders? Why do we need so many grader beats? And like, what is a grader beat? So it was like, again, so you start with an education portion where, we may have more graders, you guys have more soft services, that kind of thing. I think it's also, I have been tough, I guess, as well, because I also believe that it needs to be fair and
Yeah.
mutually beneficial. And you kind of need to find what you need to service the residents, but you can't sell the farm doing it. So again, you need to be conscious that, there is money involved, but there's also people. There's also, again, service level differences. And when you have to, whatever you come up with, you have to come back to your rural residents and say, yes, we're not funding them to a higher level than what we're funding our service level in the rural. We're providing this or we're providing that. So I think it's kind of, first of all, with friendship, then with respect. But then it has to get down to the nitty gritty, and sometimes it's not always fun. And I think the other thing on that one is that, and I've always been this, is you debate the issue, not the person.
Yeah.
And, you can have it out in that meeting room or whatever, but when you leave, you need to be able to go for a coffee or beer or whatever and, kind
No.
of remember that we're neighbors. And I think some of the regional initiatives that I've been involved with, like I said, with Alberta Northwest Species at Risk, or our tourism destination marketing organization, Mackenzie Frontier, or our REDA, which is the Regional Economic Development Alliance, all of those have all of our municipal partners as members. And so again, when you're in those rooms, you leave politics at the door and you work on the initiative of, the day that you're in there. And I think that goes a long way because you get to know people outside of that council table, right? And outside of that, regional service sharing meeting and those kind of things. And both sides get to see things in a little bit different way. And I guess for me too, both of my daughters, my youngest and my oldest, live in the town of High Level. So I spend a lot of time. And being in Zama, our service center was High Level.
No.
So, I've been involved with nonprofits within the town of High Level and, events, and I'm easily recognized, and not just because my face is on a bunch of signs at the moment, but, so when you're living in a community for over 30 years, it's all of those individual relationships. So,
So I want to go back to Ward 9 and Ward 10 becoming one and
yeah.
becoming Ward 9. And I cut you off at the moment. I'm going to paraphrase what I think you were about to say, but it sounded like you were about to say you were not in favor of the amalgamation of the two wards
No,
into one. Why?
no. Why? So, quite a few years ago, there was a very strong movement of rural high level, and this is kind of important. So, I want to, it might sound like I'm rambling, but rural high level residents have always been the catalyst for bringing to awareness good governance, fair, transparent. And quite a few years ago, there was a rural high level ratepayer association that kind of got together and went, the municipality, they were doing things that, maybe not, who knows, but was maybe not as transparent as it should have been. And so there were some pretty big changes. So Minister Iris Evans, back in the day when she was Minister of Municipal Affairs, she came in and she worked with the municipality through an administrator to create kind of a set of governance rules to hopefully create good governance that was transparent, that was, kind of took the representation, took into account the vastness of the geography, that kind of thing. And so there was a few rules around that. So we were a specialized municipality, which again, the specialized municipality were one of 6 within the province. And basically all that gives you is an exemption to the 25% plus or minus population on ward demographics. The second thing that she did was 10 counselors, but then helped write our original procedural bylaw, which included 2/3 majority vote rules. And talking to municipalities across the province, I honestly think 2/3 majority vote should be standard. I think that it leads to much better decisions. It takes away the losers and the winners kind of thing on a simple majority. But anyway, so we have these 2/3 majority vote rules. But that only works with quorum and, kind of equal representation if you have 10 counselors. And so it was working for the most part. There was a sector of people that didn't think it was working, that felt that representation by population should be more represented. And my view on that, it doesn't matter if it's my municipality or not, is I view that representation by population is actually eroding the Canadian rural northern vote. I believe that there should be more taken into account than just representation by population. But we can't do that at a municipal level when the province, again, we're creatures of the province, so they make the rules, when the province and the federal government doesn't agree. And, we can go into that. I could answer that whole other question. But so when it comes to locally, there was a vote, and it was voted to amalgamate wards 9 and 10. And so now we're here, and we're going to have to figure out kind of what the next 4 years looks like as far as governance. And so Ward 9, the new combined wards 9 and 10, which is Ward 9, runs from the Territories border to the Paddle Prairie Métis Settlements border to the south, to the BC border, from the BC border to 15 Mile, which is a Machias Lake Road. So the ward itself is about the size of Prince Edward Island. Again, it is just about over half of the land mass of Mackenzie County. It is massive, but like I said, there isn't a lot of people, but there's a lot of land, there's a lot of resource, and there's a lot of opportunity and potential. And so it's going to require someone that knows some of the history, someone who is passionate about the region, knowledgeable about more than, just maybe municipal council, and isn't afraid to push back and have those hard conversations and, ensure that our continued Mackenzie County governance is functional. So.
So what are the hard conversations that you're going to have in the next 4 years if the people of Ward 9 put their trust into you for a 4-year term? What are the hard conversations that you see coming up in Mackenzie County?
Well, as anyone knows, and I think I kind of I cringe when I see politicians say, I'm going to do, or I'm going to make sure, or I like the whole I thing is that there is no I. You need your team of council to vote. You need to have that, whether it's a road project or a service change, a service level change, whether it's, attending a meeting or going to a conference or whatever, you need to have your council support. And that, I've been good at that over the last 20 years, because you need to, you can take an issue forward, you can advocate for that issue or that project or that whatever. And then you need to be able to present that in a way where it's a benefit or the rationale behind it. And then you kind of need to keep on to it and say, hey, you need to be able to build that support before the vote. And, going forward, that's going to be even more difficult, because you have that one less person at council, you have that one less person on the northern side of the municipality that understands. So it goes back to when you have individuals, doesn't matter where you are, making decisions for you in a community that maybe they don't know, that's over 200 kilometers away, so it's kind of like, do people in Red Deer think the same way as people in Calgary? Do the people in Camrose think the same way as the people in Drumheller? And it's kind of like, what does that look like? So I think that's going to be the challenge is again, just ensuring that the team that we have at the municipal level between council and even administration, because council can make all the decisions they want, but if administration doesn't have that full buy-in, they might have direction, but if they don't have that full buy-in, let's face it, it's the bureaucracy of any government level that actually takes it forwards and implements it. So
So what does good governance what does good governance look like to you?
transparent, um, fair, but again, you can't get all the wins. So you need to be able to understand, if you don't get your way or if your community loses out on something that they really wanted, how do you address that? How do you explain it back to the ratepayers? How do you maybe bring it back up in a different way or a different light? Can you roll out what that wish was or what that warrant was in a different way through a different lens? So it's kind of adapting. So good governance, I don't know in words, transparent, adaptive would be definitely one of them because you need to be able to roll with the punches because of course, we're in a steady it's kind of everything changes daily, right? And
Can I throw a word out here for a second, see what you think about it? Because one thing I hear from residents across Alberta right now, particularly in this election, we
Mhm.
don't want the BS anymore. We don't want someone to lie to us. We want the unabashed truth. How important is it for you when you are being transparent to be truthful as well? Because being transparent is one thing, but saying to somebody, yes, we would love to have that road graded every year, but unfortunately, affordability is a big concern for a lot of people, and we
Yeah.
just won't be able to do it every year to your standard because unless you want your property taxes to go up 15% every year, that's the only way we can do it. How important is it to be transparent, but be honest about the transparency as well?
Probably most critical. And, again, and that's why I said about those hard conversations. You need to be able to actually tell them the truth. And yes, you're going to maybe hurt some feelings and, you're not going to please everybody, but you need to be able to rationalize that out. And exactly what you said, you need to be able to temper the expectation levels. And, that kind of goes back to what we kind of talked about right at the first is, the expectation levels of residents is ever climbing. And it's kind of like, well, and I don't know whether social media has brought into that because it's like, oh, well, this municipality has that, or this community has this, and how come we don't have that? And it's like, well, that municipality has this because, and they also pay for it. How? Right? Our municipality doesn't necessarily have that, or, so you need to be able to basically, sometimes you just got to say, like, hey, not going to happen. Like, that's an unrealistic expectation. It's not going to happen. But how can we make something similar? Do we have something similar? If, not every community is going to have great big huge recplexes. Not every community is going to have pavement on every inch. Not every community is going to, be able to be, have all the daycare spaces and all of those kind of things, right? Our community is very different. And I think it's easier in our community, and I'm talking like kind of county, Mackenzie County as a whole, is a lot. Is there any? I think most, 99%. 99% of the soft services, when I talk about, kind of FCSS programming or egg societies or community halls or the arenas or minor hockey or whatever those are all run by nonprofits. The county, we're kind of different, and I think a lot of rurals are like that, is we are completely different than our urban neighbors where they run. They operate the arena, they operate FCSS services, they operate all of these things. So it comes back to the municipality. Where ours
Well,
are is we have user agreements with our nonprofits, whether it's our rec societies or egg societies for our rural halls. Our museums are kind of run separately through egg societies as well. So everything kind of we do is run through nonprofits. And so when you have those conversations with them, they know how hard it is. They know how hard it is to keep the doors open and the lights on because the power and the gas bill distribution fees are so high. They know that, so when they come to us, it seems to be a lot more reasonable. I don't want to say that rurals are more reasonable, but I think just their
I will.
expectation levels are their expectations are lower, right? Their expectation are more realistic, not lower. Their expectations are more realistic because what's most important to them is low mill rate. I think so.
So let's pick up on that key word there for a second. And mill rate comes with one big other word, and that is affordability.
Mhm.
Now, municipalities cannot control the economic winds that are happening globally. They cannot control the economic winds that are happening nationally or even provincially. They can only control one thing, and that is the property taxes, which is the mill rate. Oh,
No, they can only control the mill rate. They can't control assessment,
oh,
right? And of
that
course,
yeah.
property tax. I know, but this is the big thing that gets everybody because property tax, what they pay on the bottom of their property tax bill, is actually muchly out of control of the municipality. We set the mill rate. We don't set school tax rate. We don't set, municipal law or lodge rate, lodge requisition for seniors. And so a lot of what's included on that tax bill is not it's out of our control. So we do mill rate only. And so that is for us, it is very top of mind. And, always we actually buck the system where you're taught as a municipal councillor that you set your budget, you set your expectations, you set your service level, you set your budget, and then you figure out how you're going to pay for it, which is completely backwards from any home. If you think about your home, it's like, oh, no, 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 this is how much money we have coming in every month. So this is how much money we can spend, and this is how much money we want to save, and this is how we're going to spend that. So, but it contradicts everything that you learn at home about budgeting. So we sort of buck the system on that, and we have for 20 years I've sat there, is we figure out where we can put the mill rate, where the mill rate needs to be for affordability, and then we figure out how to live within that mill rate. So we kind of do it backwards. We don't set service level and expectation and then figure out where we're going to get the money from. We figure out how much money we have and then set the service level and the expectation rate. And then we go out and say, this is why, snow removal is like this, or this is why, we don't have a park in every single subdivision, or this is why, whatever that issue is. right?
I can't believe someone corrected me on property taxes. I'm
Sorry.
still, no, I love it. I love it because I usually do mention that. It's just for
Yeah,
some reason I was thinking the grander scale thing of property taxes. That's the only thing that municipalities can control. But you're right. There are the seniors lodging and there is
cool.
the school portion of the property taxes,
Yeah,
which again, when your property taxes goes up, who gets blamed? The municipality, not the
yeah.
province for raising their education. But I want to talk about that budget cycle that you were
Hmm.
talking about. Now, that's great that you look at how much money you have before you start setting service levels. But things are costing a crap ton more right now. I was about to
Yeah,
swear, but I caught myself. A crap ton more. And that means the cost of doing business, the cost of doing those roads is getting higher. Now, to set the levels is great. But you know that if you don't continue to grow your municipality, if you don't continue to keep up with the repairs that need to be done, things are going to get worse. How do you see yourself as a counselor working in
yeah.
partnership with your other eight counselors? Because if after this next term, you will be nine, to ensure that the Mackenzie County doesn't stop fixing the things that it needs to fix, repairing the things that need to be repaired, growing the communities that need to be grown in a way that is affordable and not on the backs of the people who potentially are struggling and working paycheck to paycheck right now.
Yeah. So I think for our municipality, that's been top of mind for quite a few years. We were very dependent on linear and oil and gas.
Yeah.
With our caribou planning and kind of some of the restrictions that have come in on land base and our access to crown. Because our municipality, although we're huge in land mass, we have a very small portion of white zone. A lot of it's crown land. So the push and the advocacy to have access to crown land for our larger industries has been critical. And that will remain. And I know that that's not necessarily what your question is, but our access to crown land and our ability to grow our industry is directly related to the bottom line for affordability for our residents. Living in the north and having such a vast land mass, having the duplicity that we have to have because we're so big. We have three water treatment plants, we have three sewer lagoons, we have multiple water points. Like it's not just one in a community, right? And so having all of that, having all of the kilometers, the thousands of kilometers of road that we have, those all require industry. We need to grow our non-residential industries as far as being able to afford the things that we like and the things that we need and the things that we want. And so economic development is huge for our region. Stopping the outward flow that we've seen in revenue leave our municipality. That's going to be kind of top of mind over the next 4 years. Growing that industrial, those industrial partnerships, the value added that we have. We have two of the biggest mills in the country in our region. We now have over the last few years, we've built that out where we have a very strong pellet industry. So we have two big pellet plants in our region. But what else can we do with that wood? How can we manufacture more at home? How can we, instead of sending out raw product, how can we do more of that finishing within our municipality and then ship that out? And of course, that goes to our lack of, I guess we're at two roads in, two roads out now, one rail line, and that's again, promoting what we know about, our neighbors. Like, how can we partner more with the NWT, which is our closest neighbor? And in some respects, we have more in common with the NWT neighbors than we do with Edmonton. So how does that work for cross-border? Food security. We are one of the most northern in Canada's agricultural centers. So what does that look like as the climate shifts and as things change? Our crops are shifting. So how can we actually promote that out? How can we help feed the north? Because we know that that's a huge issue as affordability and cost of living and food security across the north. What does it look like for additional transportation corridors within Alberta and within the northern part of the provinces and points north, into the Yukon, into territories, Yukon and Alaska? What does that look like? And I think the Mackenzie County is very strategically placed to be able to be a part of all of those things. And so, back to your question, I think as far as affordability goes, it's ensuring that we continue to grow and not just in population and residential development, but that non-residential, commercial, industrial type development. Because we have the crown land to do it, because we have the population, especially the younger population, the workforce, we have that in spades. We're probably one of the very few areas that are actually, we have such a young population. Our challenge is keeping them. They grow up in our region, but then they leave because of work and all that kind of thing. So how do we actually keep them? So we need to be able to give them those good jobs. We need to be able to, again, temper expectations of our residents to affordability and really make that correlation between, okay, that road is up, I think we're over now. We're over $1 million a mile or $1 million a kilometer for pavement. So when it's like, oh, well, we want that 13 miles paved or 13 kilometers, sorry, I'm still in miles half the time, 13 kilometers paved, it's like, okay, but where's that money coming from? Like, are you willing to pay a local improvement to that? Are you willing to, help fund that? And then all of a sudden the conversation changes and it's like, okay, well, can we just have dust control? So again, it's tempering those expectations to what we can actually afford. And I think council across the board, it does not matter which municipality you're in. We need to start having those conversations with what's actually affordable. And we need to be able to say no. We need to be able to tell ratepayers like, no, we can't afford that. That expectation is too great. We can't afford that. And, we're dangerously close. You watch, kind of the trend that's happened in Alberta, across Canada, but in Alberta over the last few years is the dissolution of small towns and villages into rural municipalities. Rural municipalities don't have the option to take them or not, but they come with a very high cost. They come with a very, a lot of time degraded infrastructure. They come with high debt loads, and the rural municipalities are having to take that on and then figure out how to pay that off or how to build back that infrastructure. And so I think there needs to be more of a common sense approach to municipal, same as provincial, but municipal governments to say, what are our core issues? It goes back to your question earlier with, all of the expectations that are now coming out of municipals out of this jurisdictional. It's like, what are our main priorities? It's great to have the great big recplex or the great, all of the services. But if your roads and your sewer is falling apart, are you actually doing anyone anything any good? So I think that expectation level. I'm not sure if that answered the question. I kind of
No,
got sidetracked.
it does, but it brings up a completely different question I wasn't going to ask, but since we're playing in the sandbox, let's
Mhm.
ask this question. Now, the great big rec center is the sexy thing, though. It is the things that people can tangibly use. Now, when I pay my property taxes, when everyone pays their property taxes, they want those tangible items that they can say, this is why I'm paying the tax dollars. Now, wastewater treatment facilities are great. Pipes under the ground are great. Lift stations are great, but they are not the quote unquote sexy things that people can see. They can see it when you flush your toilet and it backs up and you have a big mess on your hand. But those are not the big tangible items. So how do you see yourself being able to balance the quote unquote big fancy items with the needed items, the pipes, the roads, because you kind of have to do both, don't you?
You do. And I think for us, and maybe it's going to be a growing trend, is
Yeah.
it comes back to, again, community building.
Yeah.
We have so many of our communities and so many of our residents that aren't community builders. They've lost that way. They've lost that, they're not involved. And for us, we have such strong nonprofits. Our rec centers in our county, our rec centers, our museums, our community halls, our riding arenas, all of that is, you know, is all, fundraise. It's not fundraise, but well, some of it's fundraise, but it's community builders that are helping us do that. And I think that changes the focus and changes the expectations of people when it's like, okay, so, prime example, we built, in the last few years, there was a huge, and so they came to the county and it's like, well, we wanted a brand new ice surface. We want another ice surface. And it's like, there's no way we can afford to build that, but we can help operate it. So you guys go build it, we'll help operate it after it's built. And that's exactly what the community did. They went and built their own beautiful ice surface. We're having this conversation about a pool at the moment, and it's like, okay, well, you guys go find it. We'll help. We're not going to build it and we're not going to run it, like operate it. But if you guys will help, you guys go build it, we'll help operate it. And finding those partnerships between whether it's school division or community organizations or whatever. So I think that it's easier if people are involved. So yes, you have those, as you call it, big sexy projects or whatever. But it wasn't that long ago, and I remember it because so the Federation of Canadian Municipalities (FCM) conference. We all arrived in Calgary on the day of the no shower. And so you had every municipality in the country converge on Calgary. And whether they tried to spin it or not, it came down to maybe the conversation. I don't know. I wasn't involved in those conversations, in those internal conversations, but maybe the big sexy things won out against looking after infrastructure. And so maybe it's, again, up to the municipalities to educate their residents on, you know what? Yes, the brand new sewer lagoon is not, maybe something that, everybody, everyone can get excited about, but it's something that everybody uses every day.
Yeah.
So again, it's kind of that tempering expectations and maybe bringing back a little bit of common sense back to what we can do and what we can afford and what's kind of tangible. So
I am very cautious of time. I did not realize we're already at the 40-minute
no
mark.
worries.
So I want to sort of switch gears for my last few questions here. And I want to talk about the future because you put your name forward, you're running for re-election. How important, and I'm going to preface this question knowing that I'm asking sort of a fluff ball question, but it's an important one. How important do you believe, how important is it for Mackenzie County to have someone of your experience back at that council table? Because you just mentioned a ton of things that the Mackenzie County is going to be dealing with over the next few years. You have the experience. On day one of this next term, you can't wait until month one to get started. You have to get started on day one to fix these issues, to address these issues. How important do you believe is it for you, with your experience, to be back at that table?
I like, I think critical. And I think, we're going to have some returning. We have some in by acclamation, so that'll be good. I just remember back when I got in 2004, we had 6 out of 10 new counselors. And it was a challenge. We had four returning counselors that did their best to, help the newbies through. But when you're first elected to council, or if you don't know what you know when you come in, I'm not saying at all that, new blood on council is not a good thing. That's not what I'm saying. But it is a complete learning curve. You get in for normally, a couple passionate reasons that you have, and then you're thrown into, drainage and sewer and policing and this and budgets and convention and, being committees that you had no idea that you needed to sit on. And it's a really big learning curve. And I think for our municipality moving forward with this incredibly huge governance change, we have to kind of temper that with experience. We need to make sure that we don't lose sight of the history that has gotten us to this point in order to ensure that we have good governance. Am I, I'm I've worked really hard for 20 years, not just for my ward, and we've seen a lot of improvements in Ward 10 and in Zama. We've also seen a lot of challenges with the drop off in industry and that kind of thing, and how my home community is rejuvenating into something different than an oil and gas service center. And that's been a challenge, but we've been through that. We've, kind of worked through that together. And then there's kind of the more regional expertise, and then there's the outside the borders. And I think as a municipal councillor, our jobs, especially on the rural side, is changing so much because we have to be those advocates outside of our borders. And especially for northern municipalities, it's even more critical. We sat 20 years ago and it'd be like, oh, you're from Northern Alberta. Oh, you're from Fort McMurray. I'm like, no, Mackenzie County, the other side. So it's crazy where you have so many people that don't even know you exist. And so the work that you do at home and then regionally and outside of the borders is critically important. And I think moving into the next 4 years, it's going to be even more so in order to keep our governance structure kind of working.
20 years later, I can still see the passion that you bring to the table. What drives you to continue on after 20 years in office?
Neighbors.
Really?
Neighbors, community. Everyone says, the next generation, which is true. Like my girls are community building in, the region as well. And my son lives and works in Fox Creek, but it's that, but it's neighbors. It's like when you have to go look at your neighbor and say, I failed, and then I need your help to work through that, or we had a success, let's celebrate. It really, you carry all that with you. And you want to be able to elect someone, whether it's municipally or federally or, provincially or whatever, or school board or, on the Ag Society or whatever. It doesn't matter what. If you support someone to be in a position You want to be able to trust that person is looking after you at that, doing that job. You don't want to have to worry about, are they going to sell me out, or are they going to take my issues forward, or are they going to have my best interests in mind? You want to be able to trust that. And I think that word where, oh, well, you're just a politician, it drives me crazy, right? Because it's like, representing people used to be one of the highest honors. And we've degraded that to a point where the respect level is very low. You get beat up on a regular basis. It's like, it goes back to the question. It's like, beat up the issue or debate the issue, but don't beat up the person, and definitely don't bring their family into it and all the rest of it. So I've dealt, we've grown through all of that. Myself and my family, I was a single mom for a long time. My kids were always involved. They were the ones, dragging in stuff with me, and so, yeah. And I think, there's a lot of conversation around terms of office. It's like, oh, they've been there forever. We need a change. And it also kind of concerns me is that every other profession rewards experience and time and passion, except for the representation of people. And is there some counselors the day after they get elected, they should be gone? Yes. Because, all of a sudden some of them, they were elected, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, this isn't what I thought the job was, and then they don't do it.
Or the
And then there's
one issue candidates who get
on
elected
issue
and go,
10.
I fixed the budget on the first try. Now what do I do
Yeah.
for the next 3.5
Yeah.
years?
Yeah, I'm done, right? And so there's that, but then there's also the ones that if, and I've said this 100,000 times, where it's like, if you get up every day and you're passionate about what you do and you show up and you represent and you work hard, then those should be the things that people recognize and reward, not necessarily that, well, she's been there for 20 years, so she must know what she's doing. Or she's been there for 20 years, that's long enough, right? So we need to get back to what are people actually doing, and are they doing the job that they're being elected for? So that's kind of what.
So my final question, and it's the $1 million question, and this is the one time of the interview where I turn the microphone over to you and you can talk for as long as or as little as you want. But pitch yourself to the people of Ward 9 in Mackenzie County. Why should people put their trust into you for another 4 years in office as this new venture of governance style in Mackenzie County starts with 9 councillors instead of 10? Anytime, Lisa.
That's hard. I am very hard. It's very hard for me to sell myself, on the things that I try to be, I've accomplished. But for me, I just want people to look at me that she's trustworthy. If she says she's going to do something, she does it. If she says she can't do it, she gives me the reasons why that can't be done, that the expectation level is going to be there, that I'm doing it for all the right reasons. I'm not that kind of, one term, that I do have the history and the reliability issue. Like I've been there. I have, blood, sweat, and tears along with my neighbors, along with my community. And, I started where it was just representing my community. And then I grew that out where it's like I'm representing my community, the county, the region. I've, taken it further with provincially and federally as far as, things like tourism and Forest Capital of Canada and the economic development things. And so I think it comes down to is that I really want the trust of the people that I represent for the next 4 years. Bottom line.
Lisa, I want to thank you so much for reaching out to the show and wanting to be part of this. I appreciate it when I get to speak with municipal leaders who sound so passionate about what they're doing and their communities that they're representing. I just admire your passion and your commitment to Mackenzie County, and I wish you all the best on October 20th. And thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me on the show. And maybe it won't be the last time.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Alberta Municipal Votes 2025 here on Municipal Affairs. Quick editorial note, if you are a candidate running in this upcoming election and want to be featured on this show before the last week of the campaign, reach out to us today by visiting the links in the show notes or by sending us a message on social media. Also, Quick reminder that on Monday, October 20th at 7:30 Mountain Standard Time, we are going live on YouTube with in-depth analysis from municipal leaders, stakeholders, past mayors, past councillors to talk about this election and the future of municipalities in the province of Alberta. Quick also side note, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platforms or by visiting us on YouTube. If you're watching us there now, click that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Also, share this episode with your friends, your family, and yes, even your community, and help keep the conversation going. Till next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we will be back with a brand new episode of Alberta Municipal Votes 2025 shortly. Till then, everyone.